Welcome to this webinar about the partnership between Lightyear.ai and NetBox Labs. I'm joined here today by Dennis. Hey, Dennis, how's it going?
Hey, Mark. Thanks for having me on and excited to chat about this.
Me too. I've been working on this for a little while now. I did some of the work on the integration itself, and I think we kicked this off a few months back. We're going to talk today about why we think that this partnership is valuable for network operators. We got a whole bunch of interesting slides to go through on that, including a demo. But maybe before we do that, Dennis, you could tell everybody a little bit more about yourself and about the company.
Absolutely. So my name is Dennis, and I'm founder and CEO at Lightyear. And Lightyear is a software product that we call the telecom operating system. And basically what it does is it automates and digitizes the full vendor management lifecycle for all of your telecom services. So things like your internet connectivity, WAN circuits, co-location space and power and phone systems. It makes it possible to configure RFP for those services digitally, to manage your installs, to track your vendor and service inventory, and even pay your bills all digitally. All workflows that tend to be very painful for the modern network engineer. And a tiny bit on myself, founded the company in 2019, and prior to that, I was an investor and I invested in telecom and software companies. So it makes sense that I ended up doing this. So excited to chat further about all the synergies between Lightyear and NetBox over the course of this presentation.
Perfect. Thanks, Dennis. So let's just have a little look at the agenda. One of the things I like to do in these webinars is kind of tee up the problem first. Like what problem is it that's out there in network engineering space that we're solving here? And what is it specifically that this partnership can help with? We're going to go through that. Then for those of you who aren't familiar, I'm going to give you a quick overview of NetBox Labs. NetBox itself, what is a network source of truth? How does it help? And then we'll take a look at how it fits into our reference architecture. And then in part three, we're going to focus specifically in on Lightyear. Dennis is going to talk us through in a little bit more detail the Lightyear platform, what it does, the problems it specifically is built to solve. And then we're going to have a look at a demo of the integration that we announced as part of our partnership. Take a little look into the Lightyear product itself, take a look around the GUI, and then see how you can easily synchronize that information into NetBox. So let's get started. Teeing up the problem, I think everybody's kind of familiar with this. Network teams are already too busy. We hear this everywhere we go. I was at AutoCon in Amsterdam about a month ago now, and this came up all over the place, right? And the answer, obviously, at AutoCon is to automate everything. Just to pull out some of the statistics here, you can see the references for those down below. 65% of network changes still performed manually, which obviously can be the source of a lot of errors, slowing people down. On the other hand, then we're going to look at what this means in a few slides. 78% of companies that have implemented a network source of truth believe it is effective in helping them. But in general, as networks get more complex, as networks get larger, the satisfaction that network operators feel is decreasing. This last stat is particularly stark. It comes from Seamus McGillicuddy, one of the guys that we follow over at Enterprise Management Associates. And he tracks this, I believe it's every 2 years, might be every 3 years, I can't remember exactly. But basically, since about 2014, when he kicked it off, there's been a steady decline in the satisfaction that network operators feel with their work, likely because they are, like I said, dealing with bigger, more complex networks, and a lot of the practices that they have in place aren't able to stand up to those challenges. Now, I don't know if any of this resonates, Dennis.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The interesting thing, and I think you'll touch on this perhaps to some degree in the next slide, is network engineers and network operators in aggregate are one of the few departments within an enterprise that hasn't been properly transformed by software and automation. You can see all of your peers in other segments of the corporation have new software tools, automation tools, and things like that that fundamentally transform their workflows and to some degree consumerize them. And network engineers have, I mean, of course, there's lots of networking software out there, but a lot of the workflows that you'll do day to day are still pretty arcane. And I guess to some degree, that's why products like NetBox Cloud and Lightyear exist.
That's exactly right. We see that all over the place, and we hear stories of networking teams looking longingly at their cloud or their DevOps colleagues and all the nice tools and APIs that they're able to use. Let's double click down a little bit into this problem, because part of this is the nature of any team, I guess. I don't think this is necessarily specific to networking, but I think in networking, like you said, we see less automation, we see less kind of joining up of all the different parts. And what we hear constantly is this term swivel chair operations, right? The idea that I've got to look in many places to figure out like what my network is doing or what it should be doing. And I called out one specifically here that often doesn't make its way onto slides, right? Which is emails. But in the operations teams that we speak to, they've normally got an IT service management tool. They've got something that's doing the physical footprint, something that's doing virtual footprint like IPAM or however they're generating their device configs. You've got monitoring tools. And obviously I could have made this, I could have put like 1,000 nodes on this little star here. Dennis, this seems to be an area that you play into directly.
Yeah, this is exactly where Lightyear plays. And when you look at the amount of swiveling you have to do on your share and the amount of nodes that would exist on, whatever shape it would end up looking like for a network operator when you deal in just circuit management, it becomes quite painful. So, if you just think about the life cycle of an individual circuit for the average status quo enterprise today, creating an RFP means emails, phone calls, and Googling to determine, like maybe what vendors might be the local exchange carrier or cable company in a specific geography, but with very imperfect information, then validating your technical requirements, noting things like diversity, redundancy, things like that. That's going to be a manual process, email and spreadsheets, perhaps for that. Then signing contracts, that's a manual process. Managing installs, that you may be doing that out of a spreadsheet, maybe you're doing that out of email. Post install, maybe you track some components of your circuit inventory in an ITSM. Maybe you track some components of your circuit inventory in a product like a NetBox, as an example, where you have maybe not the full holistic view from like a vendor and payment perspective, but you at least have some components of a track, or maybe you have no circuit inventory maintained whatsoever. Renewals tend to be manual, ticketing tends to be manual. Bill payments tend to be manual, and service disruptions can be costly. So in all aspects of that life cycle, the average enterprise is unfortunately not really leveraging software. And that leads to lots of context switching, lots of manual workflows, and lots of network operators spending time in areas that are really manual and tedious and non-strategic, which is perhaps leading to that decreasing satisfaction.
I think it's a real hotspot for that sort of decreasing satisfaction. We see even on the other side of this, which is, I don't know, something like talking to devices that are already up and in the network, right? Like one of the big problems that people have there is they've got devices from different vendors. Those vendors might even have APIs, but then how do I normalize that data? How do I make sense of the whole network and sort of treat it holistically? Sounds like what you're saying is that on the the circuit management side, it's even worse than that, right? There's no API. You're talking about like 5,000 emails in my drafts or in my inbox, sorry, somewhere. Probably different processes you've got to follow. Probably different language, different standards for how they describe their offerings. That's really like as far away from automation as it can get.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it just none of these vendors are digitally native. And to some degree, a lot of the ISPs in particular tend to benefit from just a lack of transparency and automation because it means more lock-in for the customers to some degree. Maybe that's a little bit of the tinfoil hat in me, but I think that's largely accurate.
Well, maybe before we go into it, we can explore that just a little. Yeah, I read some of your materials online, which were incredibly useful. I will find the specific link and post them in the show notes afterwards for anyone who wants to have a look, especially if you're like me, you're vaguely familiar with circuits, but you've never really installed one. You mentioned there might be a bit of a tinfoil hat situation happening there, but across the vendors, what's the sort of what's the behavior look like? Like, is everybody kind of forcing everyone to go through emails, or are there some that are trying to improve and others that just don't seem to be able to update their processes?
So if you talk to the marketing teams of a lot of the carriers, you will hear about all of this work on automation and digitization of the customer experience. And there's some noise about this. In the same way, you'll hear noise about things like, for example, 5G and other items that may be more marketing than reality to some degree. And that's largely what it is with automation. There are some digital tools out there that exist, but I speak to thousands of enterprise network operators, and I don't know anyone that's doing anything digitally. The quoting tools don't work. They're very error prone because it's very difficult for an ISP to even know where their actual network is and how it should be priced, whether or not construction is required to build into something where a point of entry may be. So quoting is very difficult. You'll get back a shitty quote whenever they deliver you back an automated quote as well, oftentimes one that's incorrect. Contracting is not possible digitally for a lot of the services that you'd like as an enterprise, like a dedicated circuit or a wave circuit or something of that nature. Install management is all done via email. It's very error prone and manual, delay prone, and post install. You may be one enterprise with 50 services with a vendor like Comcast or AT&T. You may have 7 different portal logins for all of those services. So unfortunately, the experience is far from ideal, and you can extrapolate that to the quantity of vendors you may be working with.
Mm, absolutely. And that's probably not a linear thing either, because you get tired, you're already overwhelmed. It continues to get worse.
Yep.
So we're going to pivot away from the problem for a minute. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about NetBox and NetBox Labs before we go into sort of the meat of the webinar, where we'll look specifically about what Lightyear does. And then we'll have a look at the integration. So let me just take you through some of these. For those of you who are not familiar, NetBox Labs, of which I'm a co-founder, was founded in 2023, came out of a little team that was at NS1. And I'll talk more about sort of the journey of the NetBox project over time. We're the commercial stewards of open source NetBox, and then we also have commercial products that go with that, and I'll take you through each of those later. Just to kind of tee this up, we got a friend over at CACI, Alex Enkers. If any of you are into newsletters, I suggest you check out Alex's network automation newsletter called Reload in 10. It comes out every Friday. It's packed with great information and it's very amusing. But I think Alex really kind of captures it here, right? Enterprises and organizations that leverage a network source of truth this year will gain a clearer and more comprehensive view of their network, generating more efficient and effective overall network operations. So when we looked at that slide earlier with the star on it, obviously we're going to drill down into one specific area here around vendor management for circuits or dedicated internet access. But that's all over the place, right? And very often what we see when people start using NetBox is they're coming from not only disparate sources of information about their network, but also within that, they include tacit information, right? The team just knows how things work, but it's not written down. It can't be reasoned about. So let's look into kind of what this is. Really, in a network source of truth, you're looking at layers of truth about your network. We see circuits down the bottom here, but we also have network properties, configuration, IPAM, DSIM, inventory. I'm going to talk about this top line a little more on the next slide, where it says it defines the intended state of the network. That's actually kind of a second or third step for a lot of companies. But eventually, what happens with the network source of truth is that it starts to become a structured data repository for what's in your network and what your network should look like. And having this single repository of information about the data removes some of that swivel chair operations, right? I can look in a single place to understand what's going on if I'm planning an upgrade, right? The first thing that teams tell us they do when they start designing an upgrade to a network or an addition to a network is they got to figure out what's already there. It's also incredibly useful when debugging an issue, right? So you get a ticket coming through from a user saying, I can't access the internet, whatever it is. And of course, as per usual, it's the network team's fault. The first thing you want to do there is really understand, well, what should it have been doing in the first place? Like, is this an anomaly? And by using a network source of truth, you can start to reduce the variables to help you debug these issues faster. On the third bullet point, we talk about kind of a mental shift here. I think that mental shift is happening more and more. I was at AutoCon in Amsterdam, like I mentioned, and as part of my talk, I said, just hands up in the room if you're using NetBox. And it was like, everybody put their hands up. So I think people are using this, and I think they're starting to get it. But for many, that shift has been it's been tougher in certain areas, right? Like, I think putting things into a single system like NetBox makes sense. I think the shift that we'll look at in a moment that's tricky for people is going from, okay, I've got everything in there, but how do I now start using it at the beginning of my process when I'm planning out new things? But what happens when they do that is, as it says in the last bullet here, right? The network source of truth becomes the authoritative reference for the network and its data. And I'll look at automation shortly soon. Now, for anyone who's listening who's heard this single source of truth, SSOT, before, you might be wondering, how does this interact? We don't really believe that there is a single source of truth. I think that term was created somewhere at some point, and it was attributed to NetBox in a lot of ways. We call NetBox a network source of truth because for us, we have this comprehensive data model that allows you to, like I said, be the central repository for a lot of information about the network. But, as we're going to see today, there are other sources of truth. We're going to look at Lightyear and all the information and the workflows that it enables. So often the network source of truth is either authoritative for information like DSIM, IPAM, configuration properties, or it's tightly connected to other sources of truth so that those tools can work together to reduce the swivel chair ops that we were talking about earlier. Now, I mentioned the journey, right? Because in that previous slide, we looked at, I think it was the first bullet where we said, the network source of truth is authoritative. It's used to drive change in the network. That's actually not where people start most of the time. If you imagine the situation of a team who have, data all over the place. So maybe you've got a wiki, maybe it's up to date. Maybe you've got a spreadsheet, maybe that's up to date. Maybe there's important information that was contained in a design process, right? That was in a PowerPoint, or maybe it was in a Lucid chart or something like this. There's all sorts of bits of information across a networking team and across the broader organization quite often. And typically when people start implementing a network source of truth, what they start doing is figuring out which parts of that data naturally should live in the network source of truth, should live in NetBox. And that's what we call the document stage. Now, once that starts to happen and people start to build trust in the data, move into the modeling stage. And the modeling stage really isn't that different, but it's where you start to connect the data. So you could, for example, have, start using NetBox to just model your IPAM, right? So what's my IP address space? What's in there? Make sure I don't have any clashes and everything else. We've seen examples where teams have the DSIM mapped out. They've got the devices, power, cabling, and everything else. They've got the IPAM mapped out somewhere else, but the two aren't connected. And that's just one example of where people start to get into this modeling stage, where now you're saying, okay, we have a central place for all of this information, but does this information reference itself across these different traditional data silos? And then the third step, as I covered in the last slide, is automate. So typically as this trust goes up in the network source of truth, you get to a point where you don't really look anywhere else, right? So then you're like, okay, I'm planning out a new change to the network, or I want to, I get a ticket and I need to bring up a port and add a VLAN. It naturally becomes the obvious place to do it in the network source of truth, because you can make the change there and affect the change in the network, which means not only do you have you've kind of killed a few birds with one stone there. the network source of truth data model will tell you what's possible and what isn't. So when you're planning out changes, you can't add clashing IP space. You can't add a 49th connection to a 48-port switch. It's like the first line of defense for things that you're about to roll out. But also it's a shared view. So as you're updating that, not only can you say, hey, does this look right? You can share it with your colleagues, but also once you've made that change, it's now self-documented. So it's a total shift away from this, like go put everything in a spreadsheet and a PowerPoint, update the network, and then hope that somebody updates the documentation. It is the documentation. And then, of course, one of the things that we'll see in a minute is, the interconnected nature of NetBox, where we really plug into everything and have rich APIs and everything else, means that people typically then put NetBox upstream from their automation, right? So it might be just generating configs and passing them to an engineer to deploy, all the way up to config deployment pipelines. So I covered a lot of this already, but NetBox is the world's most popular network source of truth. Now, it started in 2016. My co-founder, Jeremy Stretch, was at DigitalOcean, and they had exactly this problem. They looked around and they said, I can get tools to do all of this, but they're separate tools. Like, how do I link all this information together? So the first insight back in 2016 at DigitalOcean was we want the DSIM and the IPAM to be in the same tool. And that idea of combining data sources where it makes sense and then using a rich API to connect to other data sources where it makes sense remains a core guiding design philosophy of NetBox. And that's grown into a huge data model now, which is adopted by most of the companies we can think of. Everybody uses NetBox, right? It's become wildly popular on the open source side, and we're going to look at some more of those differentiations in a minute. But really, this insight of, okay, I don't want disparate tools for certain parts of my network, right? These things kind of logically belong together, so why shouldn't they belong together in the same tool, has what's driven the adoption of NetBox. And, it's not just the logos that have picked it up, but also the size and the enthusiasm of the community. Thousands of people, I mean, it's thousands across all of these things, but 10K global deployments. One of the things that having NetBox being open source does for us is that there's an awful lot of enthusiasm to give back. And this is not just contributions to core NetBox, where we have many maintainers and many people discussing, feature requests and bugs and everything else, but also in the broader ecosystem. I mentioned earlier that the API is one of the ways that people extend NetBox, but also there's custom scripts, as we're going to see today. There's plugins, and a lot of these software commits that we see back to NetBox are in the form of people building on top of and around NetBox to enable their own use cases. So just a quick view on this, and I'm going to hand back to you, Dennis, to talk a little bit about Lightyear. So NetBox sounds fantastic. How do you get started? Well, if you're not already started, like most people, you've got kind of three options. We have NetBox open source, which is open source, will always be open source, and we're continually reinvesting in that. As it says here, it's the most widely used source of truth by far, massive and active community. We're continuing to invest in making open source NetBox easier to use. I think we've done something like one announcement a week since the beginning of 2024. And there's fantastic news coming up. We've started teasing branching for NetBox open source, which will be an open source feature. So that's always growing, and there's a big community around that to support you. Some companies need additional support or additional features, and we have two flavors there. The first one is NetBox Enterprise. NetBox Enterprise is essentially the on-prem version of NetBox Cloud. So you get all of the functionality from open source NetBox, but you also get a whole bunch of enterprise features on top of that, which make it easier to plug into your business's context. You also get 24/7 support and a whole bunch of the learnings that we took from running NetBox Cloud over the last few years went into NetBox Enterprise, so that if you either just can't go to cloud, for example, we are aware of people running NetBox on submarines, then obviously Enterprise might be right for you. Or if you could theoretically go to cloud, but maybe you've been using NetBox for so long, you've been running it on-prem, and it's really just, it kind of has to stay there for now. NetBox Enterprise is perfect for you. NetBox Cloud is exactly what it sounds like, right? It's everything you get in Enterprise, but then we also reduce all of the management work for you because we're running that in the cloud for you and you consume it as you would any other cloud resource. Now, because NetBox is obviously talking into people's networks very often, one of the things that we added on with NetBox Cloud is a whole host of very fine-grained, what we call custom connectivity options. Sometimes people running in the cloud are a little worried about, oh, so I'm sending my entire iPad onto the cloud, or, how am I going to get NetBox to talk into my network if I'm doing things like deploying new configs? One of the areas we spent a lot of time on there is making sure that there are connectivity options from the cloud to your network so that you can do that in a way that works for you. So that's just a quick heads up there. And now, Dennis, I think I'm going to pass to you to tell us a little bit about Lightyear.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark, for the overview there. And excited to tell you a little bit about Lightyear, which once again, we call the telecom operating system and is built to automate the entire life cycle of your telecom. We were founded in 2019, and I'll get a little bit further into the problem on the next page. So Lightyear was founded because I was investigating business telecom and quickly realized that the circumstances facing the average network operator were unfortunately far worse than I would have thought based on how mission critical network infrastructure is to the enterprise. Generally, I discovered that telecom vendors who are selling you things like your internet circuits, WAN circuits, data centers, phone systems, they don't really operate with the customer in mind in a few different ways. All workflows around telecom, things like quoting, install management, tracking renewals, ticketing, it all requires a lot of manual offline workflows and lots of follow-up to get things done. Typically, decisions around your network are made without data in hand, as there's very little transparency into things like vendor serviceability, optimal pricing, vendor performance, and information like that. That'd be very important to an enterprise to making decisions. And enterprise customers of ISP services operating at any scale often face lots of difficulty keeping track of all of their various service details, contract information, renewal dates, and the like, often utilizing spreadsheets, if anything at all, which, you add all of this up, it means a lot of inefficiencies when buying and managing telecom, which costs the enterprise a lot of time and money and can also create operational challenges as well for the business if network doesn't work. Could you go to the next page, Mark? And that's why we created Lightyear. So Lightyear, again, is the telecom operating system. And basically, this is a software product that digitizes and automates the full life cycle of your telecom service. And it's built around continuous and systematic cost optimization. And it comes in a few different pieces. So first, we have a procurement suite, which allows you to digitally create RFPs for new telecom services, conduct exhaustive vendor searches completely digitally, and leverage the best data set in business telecom to ensure that you identify the right vendors that meet your network engineering standards or whatever it may be, and also that you get the best possible price for whatever services you'd like. Post-installation, Lightyear acts as a digital system of record for your network service inventory centered around all the various vendor and service details that are important for network operations or vendor changes, eliminating the need for things like spreadsheets and automating things for you like handling your renewals prior to service expiry, placing service change tickets, or knowing what to do to deal with a network outage. We can also onboard your existing network service inventory into the system of record, and this whole system of record and these RFP workflows can digitally integrate into NetBox as well to create sort of a tie between your network operations and also your network procurement and network service inventory as well, which we'll get into in a little bit. And throughout all of this, Lightyear also provides you with a team that provides white glove support around implementations, network engineering decisions, renewal, service changes, and much more. And hopefully this is valuable to whoever is watching this, because you'll realize that enterprises who leverage Lightyear spend 70% less time on telecom service procurement and vendor management, and are able to reduce costs in their network by 20% or more, with continuous long-term optimization in mind, because you're leveraging the most fulsome carrier network in the industry and the most fulsome data set in the industry.
That's really interesting on the 70% less time spent. Just like we were saying earlier, right? Like networking teams are already too busy. And in preparation for this call, I reached out to a friend of mine who works at a medium-sized business in the UK. As I mentioned earlier, right? Like very aware of what circuits are, but never been through the process of installing one myself. So I thought I'd reach out to him and ask him. And he echoed exactly what you say. He said it's a nightmare. He's got like tens of different emails with different quotes and different formats all over the place, right? Like one story he told me about is, they just missed the renew date for a dedicated internet access offering. Now they're automatically enrolled for another 2 years into the next cycle, even though they weren't happy with it already. Like really tricky stuff.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate life of a network engineer today. And that stuff is accurate. And the unfortunate, the 70% of time that we're cutting out is time spent on the most tedious and probably bane of existence type activities that fall into the life of a network engineer. If you have to not deal with the renewal again, I'm sure that's probably the happiest that you could make someone, because hopefully you have better things to do with your time.
Well, that's exactly it. And a lot of the time what we hear is people want to spend their time automating, but what they're having to do is do the automation weekends and evenings because they're too busy just kind of keeping the lights on. So 70% savings on something that you already don't like doing, they could be spent better for sure.
Awesome. And just digging into sort of the service offering here, there are two primary components of the Lightyear platform. First is procurement, which powers procurement for net new services from RFP configuration all the way through to your installation. And what our procurement suite allows you to do is digitally create RFPs that'll conduct an exhaustive vendor search for you, backed by the best data set in the industry. And it also includes project management software that tracks each component of your service installation to ensure that you get the best and optimal installation experience. And this can power RFPs and installs for one service at a time, or 10 or 100 or 1,000 services all at one time, to the extent you want to take advantage of potential bulk procurement benefits. Throughout the procurement process, once again, we have a team that can provide you with network engineering support and white glove install escalation help as well. Post installation, that's where Lightyear has a network inventory manager that acts as sort of a centralized repository for all your service and vendor data in one place, that digitally tracks over 30 unique data points for each one of your network services, such as contract start and end dates, SLAs, static IPs, and much, much more. And it automates a bunch of service workflows, such as, to the extent you're reaching the end of one of your contracts for a service, you won't get automatically renewed into a new service term if you don't want to be. We'll reshop services prior to the renewal to the extent you'd like. You can place tickets on services. You want to move a service, upgrade, downgrade, disconnect a service. You can do that with clicks rather than phone calls. And all of this adds up to save you time and money. And it's worth noting that our procurement service is free to use. You can sign up at lightyear.ai, create an account, and start procuring a circuit today if you'd like. And our network inventory manager is provided for free for services that you procure via Lightyear. And for network inventory manager, if you'd like to onboard your existing network that you didn't buy via Lightyear, we charge a SaaS subscription fee as well.
Got it. So that's kind of interesting. Maybe let's just click on that, double click on that usage cost there for a minute. So what you're saying is, if I just want to go create an account at lightyear.ai and figure out like what might be available to me through the platform, right? Like maybe I've got some refreshes coming up, maybe some licenses are running out. I can do that for free.
You can do that absolutely for free. And if you end up buying, you'll get the install manager and that network inventory manager for those services for free.
Got it.
That's exactly right. And the reason why that works is, when you're buying network services directly from carriers, which is mostly how things work, there is a whole sales team that's getting commissioned on your sales that you're buying. When you buy via Lightyear, effectively the commission that would otherwise go to a sales rep at a carrier goes to Lightyear. So it doesn't increase the cost you're paying for those services, and it allows us to offer you this valuable service for free. No contract, no anything. So it's very easy to underwrite the ROI of $0.
Nice. Okay, moving along.
And today it's worth noting that Lightyear works with over 300 enterprises of all sizes across industries and across geographies, ranging from Fortune 50 to smaller regional businesses. So you can see some larger enterprise customers like Motorola Solutions, Honeywell, Palo Alto Networks, Five Guys, Starwood, but all across industries here, manufacturing, industrial, retail. And we also work with over 1,200 telecom carriers spanning the globe. We have really the most exhaustive carrier network and data set.
Oops. Go back. Here we go.
And just finally noting that, Lightyear is the first end-to-end software product for enterprise that allows you to automate your procurement and management telecom workflows. Second, make data-driven decisions. And third, unify your network system of record. And, excited to then touch on NetBox plus Lightyear, how you can have a much more holistic automated network operation, because obviously we don't have any eyes on your network and tie into all of your various other networking tools. This is where you can really, if you're able to automate the vendor bidding, install end of things, and even bill payment and things like that with Lightyear, and you're able to utilize NetBox, you can probably have a far, far better life that you could visualize as a network engineer.
Thanks, Dennis. Okay, so let's have a look at that. So one of the things we can talk about maybe a little later is roadmap, like what's coming up next. But, to sort of introduce this section, I want to talk about one of the recent additions, or I believe it was recent at least, which is the API for the platform.
Yep.
Was that a 2024 edition?
Yeah, that was a earlier this year edition that's now getting a good amount of utilization.
Okay, so in that sense, I've been a guinea pig this year. Obviously the NetBox integration would not be possible if Lightyear didn't have an API, but fortunately it does. And that's exactly what we're using to do the integration that you can see the screenshot of over here on the right. I want to first, before we show how the integration works, I just want to take people around the Lightyear interface a little bit and give them a sense of how it looks underneath, so they can see the sort of richness of the data that we're able to sync into NetBox.
Yeah, let's do it.
Maybe you could, you can drive, and I'll click.
Yeah, you want to maybe start on the home there. If you click that home button right there. Okay, yeah. Cool. So real quick, this is the dashboard that you would see as a Lightyear user upon first login. In the middle, you have some action items like some quotes and contracts to review, some ongoing installs. On the right-hand side, if you were to, you could manage your team or start a new RFP. And on the left-hand side, you have a navigation pane. So let's just take you through a few quick items to showcase sort of the life cycle of a service, and then we'll touch on how that integrates with your NetBox experience today. So on the left-hand side, if you go to the procurement dashboard, maybe let's click on quotes and orders. And let's go to this New York City HQ quote for internet at the bottom right there. Yeah, that's right. So here you can see what is returned after a hypothetical circuit request here. You put in an RFP, and in a pretty quick amount of time, you'll get circuit bids from a variety of vendors here, where you won't just see what's the cost of the circuit, but you'll also see the install interval, the transport type, static IP inclusion. Is the last mile provider different than the actual infrastructure provider selling you the service? So you can see here, GTT is actually reselling Crown Castle, availability SLAs, etc., and the like. And you're able to make objective decisions with data in hand on what to put in your network. Hopefully, saves you some time, makes your life easier, and helps you avoid errors. And Mark, if you could then go to the left-hand side and click on installations under quotes and orders. And, like we were talking about, if you click on this Zayo install, um, installs are often the bane of a network operator's existence to some degree, getting your circuit up and running. So we actually have this whole project management system built into the software here that will actually track every job step that goes into an install, make sure that you have a great experience with an install. And we actually have a team monitoring all of these job steps to make sure that there aren't issues. Action items are proactively flagged to you to make sure that you're on top of anything that could hold up an install, and we'll make sure that we proactively escalate any issues that arise in the context of an install before you may even know that that delay occurs. So hopefully you have a much higher probability of a successful installation. Um, and then if you can click on the left-hand side and go to the inventory dashboard. So this is like, you have a service installed, then that'll go into your circuit inventory. And here, we have a variety of different views here where we can show you basically your network monthly spend over time, what you're spending on service type, by vendor, when things expire, when your renewal opportunities arise. So we'll actually track all your renewals. And when things go month to month, we'll actually estimate any potential savings you can get on a circuit, and you can click to reshop an individual circuit and execute cost savings. And we'll track over time any of the cost savings that you achieve on the services. And then if you can go to the mapped view on that inventory.
Yeah.
So here's like another way to view it where you can see sort of like a more granular map view on your circuit inventory. And if you could just click into any one of these services, let's go to this point-to-point circuit with Zayo. So this is where, rather than the holistic view, which you were seeing earlier on the dashboard, here you can see sort of a more granular view. We'll track those 30 unique data points per circuit, your expiry details, your site level contacts, your contacts at the vendor, who do you need to call if you have an outage, your SLAs, your account IDs, your circuit IDs. You want to make a change on the circuit, you could do it right here. You want to know when it expires, you want to move this circuit, you want to disconnect this circuit, this can be where you do that. And this is sort of exportable, integratable with like any specific system that you'd like. And you can see here basically from bid to renewal, you can get a flavor of the type of experience you'd have across not just one vendor, but all of your circuit vendors, no matter who those vendors are. You can have a real standardized lifecycle management experience. So I think, Mark, this could be maybe a good time to showcase perhaps like how this integrates with NetBox.
It is. It's perfect, actually, because to understand, for those of you who are already familiar with NetBox, I'll show you around in a minute, and we can have a look at the circuit functionality and circuit types. But it's actually at this layer. It's at the service layer that we do the mapping between the two. So what we've created is an integration for Lightyear that uses a custom script. Under the hood, it's doing a few things. But before I get into that, let me just show you around the API, the GUI a little bit. So if you're not familiar with NetBox, this is what it looks like. Like I said earlier, it brings together DSIMs, sites, regions, racks, roles, devices, power, cabling, everything else. And it goes up to the virtual layer where you can see, your IPAM, or for example, you can, let's see, if I want to do device configurations, then I can introduce Ginger 2 templates here. And it basically brings the whole thing together for managing the network lifecycle. One of the things that we have in here is circuits, right? And the NetBox circuit data model is really focused on operations, right? It assumes that there is a circuit. What it doesn't do is what Lightyear is doing, which is, all of this fanning out, getting bids, managing the life cycle, keeping you in control of that process. But once that process is successful, or even throughout that process, you want to be able to look in NetBox and say, okay, give me the high-level view. Like, what have I got here? So that I can click over to Lightyear if I need to. So circuits are organized by types, right? So you can have different types of circuits, and we'll see how this works in a minute. And then they have providers, provider accounts, provider networks, and a whole bunch of more information in here. The way that the integration works is we call out to Lightyear with some details that you give us. And what we're going to do is we're going to pull all of the services over here. And we're going to do this in a couple of ways, right? One is it's idempotent. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is you can run this sync as often as you want. It's always going to get the latest data from Lightyear. And you don't have to worry about, oh, I've run it twice, so I've got twice the number of circuits now or anything like that. It's going to specifically check to make sure that it always updates NetBox to contain the latest information that you have in Lightyear. It won't overwrite anything that already exists. So as Dennis said earlier, you probably already have a bunch of circuits, right? And maybe you're starting to use Lightyear for some of those, hopefully more over time. If you've already got a bunch of circuits in here and there's some kind of clash, right? For some reason, something in Lightyear looks the same as in here, that'll stop and that'll tell you. So you can very easily switch this on and just start getting enriched data into NetBox. And in NetBox 4.1, when we introduce branching, it'll be easy to then write this into a branch so that you could, for example, run this each evening. And then when you wake up in the morning, you go and have a look in your branch and you say, oh, that's interesting. Something's happened in Lightyear, right? You go and inspect the difference and then decide whether to apply that to your main data model. So let's take a look at the challenge. The challenge is we have a ton of useful information in Lightyear and we have an empty NetBox. So how do we fix this? Well, let's see, customization. We have a script already predefined here. And you can see that all it requires are the Lightyear key and Lightyear secret. So I just need to stop sharing to do this for a minute, because otherwise we'll be able to get into my Lightyear, and then we'll have a look at it running. Now, it's worth pointing out while I'm doing this that the integration we've gone for so far is relatively simple. It pulls information about services into circuits and updates the data as they go. So one thing to think about is, if you've just started a procurement process with Lightyear, you won't already have a circuit ID, right? Like, because you haven't chosen one yet, right? It hasn't been delivered, it hasn't been given to you by the vendor through Lightyear. So in that case, what we do is we just use the name of the service to put in as the circuit ID. So you can easily then go and identify that in Lightyear and figure out what's going on with it. And then as that circuit ID is delivered, we'll detect that and we'll update it. So that now you've got the actual circuit ID in both places. And there's a few other simplifications like that going on in the back end, just to make sure that you always have the most up-to-date data with the minimum number of decisions to make. But obviously, this is something that we're excited about building over time, because there could be a lot of really cool options for how you filter this or how often you update it and all sorts of other things. So in the background, I've just run that script now, and the output from this is fairly minimal, but I just want to talk you through it. So the script itself, let's see, I'm just going to reshare. Here we go. I'm going to reshare that script. This is obviously like an administrator's view, and what you can really see is the type of information that's being created in the background. You can see that in total, there were 40 circuits brought over. And what we do, this is the idempotence working, right? So we only create things if they don't already exist. So you can see there's 2 circuit types, so we skip the other 38, and there's 12 different providers, so we skip the other 28. That is obviously just for administrators. Let's go look at what's in our NetBox now. So let's start with the circuit types. You can see that of the 40 circuits that were brought over from Lightyear, there's only 2 types, internet or WAN point-to-point. And if you're familiar with NetBox, you'll already know that all of this is connected, right? So I can just go in here and I can say, give me all of the circuits that relate to this one. What I can also do is look at providers. So you can see that it's included those 12 providers. And of course, all of this now links back to the circuits that are included down below. If we go and have a look in circuits, we can see the full view. So we've gone from an empty NetBox to this now being fully populated with what is in that current configuration in Lightyear.ai. And this is the kind of script, like I said, that you can run every evening or as often as you want. What it's going to do is it's always going to make sure that when you're managing the rest of your network, this part that's in Lightyear is always being updated as well, so you can see what's in there. And obviously, you could then start including information internally, right? So let's say that I get an IP from the vendor. Now I want to make sure that that's represented correctly on the device internally. That can be done so that now, like we said earlier, you're modeling instead of documenting, right? So now you're connecting this information to the other information in your network so that you can, for example, trace from the incoming connection across your network.
Yeah, the pretty exciting thing to note here is, you can visualize as a NetBox user, you have NetBox that tracks and automates all of these various components in your network, you know, devices, VPNs, all of these various items. However, on the circuit end, probably the most pesky component is if you want to sort of maintain or track an inventory or make changes based on something you discover via NetBox, you're going to have to interact directly with one of these ISPs or vendors or pull stuff out of a spreadsheet. Now you can automate that whole thing. You notice something inadequate in your network, you want to make a change, you want to transform something, you can use Lightyear to automate that. And then as things change live, you can import that directly into your NetBox instance and vice versa. And as a Lightyear user, the sort of inverse is true. You now have a tool you can utilize to track all of these components of your network that are not really within the scope of Lightyear, and also automate workflows that are not really within the scope of Lightyear. And together, you could just get a lot more done.
That's exactly right. Okay, so that's the demo. It kind of does what it says on the tin, although we do have a little roadmap of improvements here. I'll name maybe a couple of the obvious ones. Well, I just named one, actually. I guess it's not roadmap anymore because we did it. At the moment that the circuit ID is delivered by the vendor, that'll now be updated in here instead of using the name. What you might want to do in here is to be able to quickly jump over to Lightyear. So, it's a very simple update, but that can save some time, is we're going to add a custom field in here so that if you click through to one of the Lightyear sourced circuits, there will be a field where you can automatically follow a URL back to the Lightyear interface, so you can see what's going on there, and then hopefully just jump back and forth as much as you need to manage your circuits with 70% less messing around. All right, let's get back to the slides. So I think we're almost there. I just want to talk a little bit about this automation architecture for a minute and how Lightyear fits in. At NetBox Labs, we talk about our big tent strategy all the time, right? And what that really means is we seek to stay in our lane, right? We're a network source of truth, and partner with as many people as we can who help us to deliver on our mission. Our mission is to make it easier to operate and manage networks. Network automation reference architecture for a minute. Really what we're trying to capture here is that aspirational state of automation that we saw earlier in the slide where we looked at documenting, modeling, and automating. So just to run you through it a minute, the idea is that network acts as the intent of the network. NetBox, acts as the intent of the network source of truth. And from this, you can do a couple of things. You can make changes in your network source of truth that are then pushed out through automation to the network. But you can also use the network source of truth to tell your observability and assurance what the network should look like, so that it can be looking for any differences in that. Down here, we have operations where a lot of these decisions are being made. When should we deploy something? If we do find a difference between the intended state of the network and the observed state of the network, what are we going to do about it? And a lot of our operations partnerships so far have been really focused around IT service management, which is why it's exciting to add Lightyear in here to help with this specific problem that, as we saw earlier, can save us 70% of our time doing jobs that are unpleasant down here in the operations category. I think that brings us home, Dennis. I'm just going to give a couple of shout outs for things that you might want to try. If you're interested in NetBox, the simplest way to run it is to join the new NetBox Cloud free plan. That's a free forever instance that you can use. It's packed with information to help you get up to speed. If you're interested in the Lightyear plus NetBox integration that you've seen, you can reach out to us at sales@netboxlabs.com. The Lightyear and NetBox integration is available to enterprise and cloud customers of NetBox Labs. Dennis, over to you.
Awesome. So if you're interested in Lightyear, go to lightyear.ai and you can create an account and immediately begin just using the product as you see fit, play around, get your own instance. And you can also on the homepage click to book a demo or meeting with us to discuss any specific request. And Also, on the Lightyear end, if you use Lightyear today and you're interested in the NetBox integration and you have any questions, also, reach out to us as well.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you, Dennis. I really appreciate your time today. I've got one more question that I didn't fit in earlier. We touched on how the API has been a big sort of roadmap item that was added in 2024. I don't know if you're able to give any heads ups on what we can expect from Lightyear in the coming quarters.
Absolutely. And great question. So the API was a big unlock for us where we can also pull in information from your ITSMs and tie in with tools like NetBox as well. And, like current and upcoming, we recently publicly announced our bill consolidation product where you can basically now manage all of your vendor invoices and pay bills via Lightyear. So avoid those service disruptions, audit all of your telecom spend and track spend relative to contract. Now that's all in one place as well, can save you a bunch of time. And sort of upcoming is network monitoring, integrations, and tooling. So we can actually tie in with all of your existing software and actually tell what is going on your circuits and potentially initiate or suggest vendor changes based on what's going on in your network and further deepen our automation within this realm of sort of telecom, internet, and WAN circuits.
Perfect. Thank you, Dennis. I think there's just one slide, which is to say thank you to everybody who's been watching at home. Keep your eye on the NetBox Labs website. Keep your eye on the Lightyear website. Lots of interesting things coming up on both sides, and I'm personally really excited to see where this partnership goes. Thanks, Dennis.
Likewise. Thank you.